Welcome back to the Adonai Games animation gameplay workshop. Today we're going to be looking at player character dashing. This video is going to be shorter than most because we're just going to look at one simple function that we created in today's class. So let's go ahead and see where we started. The first thing that we've looked at is that we created something known as dash under a comment, and then we have a collapse graph under it. We are using an input key as Q. Previously we had Q bound for something in testing, so if you did have that, make sure you disconnect it. And let's dive right into it. So there are a lot of different nodes that we're going to go over. The first thing, we're going to leave disable input for now, is how exactly can we make our character dash. So for the most part, what we're going to use is add movement input, right? This is the same movement input that you can see over here, movement input. This is what makes your character go forward, backward, and this follows your common trajectory of your character movement speed, as well as acceleration, etc. But since this is only going to be added once, we need to add it to a timeline. So the timeline can act as an event tick here. So basically, as long as this timeline runs, it's going to constantly keep adding that movement over and over again. Excuse me. Right. So within this timeline, as you can see, the length of the timeline is 0.50, right? So for 0.50 seconds, that's going to constantly keep sending out that update. And the way we are adding the world direction is we're using the capsule component, which is this particular capsule component, right? And we are adding, we're getting the forward vector out of it. So whichever direction the capsule is facing in terms of its movement, so, you know, whichever direction it faces, that's the direction it's going to return the value of, and that's the value it's going to add to. So as soon as we press Q, it's going to start doing that. It goes from play from start all the way to update, and it keeps doing that for a little bit. But in order for it to be a dash, what we need to do is make sure like the speed is a lot faster than what the current character movement speed is, and make sure the acceleration is basically instantaneous. So acceleration and max walk speed are characteristic parameters within the character movement. So character movement is a component within your character. So as you can see, the max acceleration is on the right side under character movement, which is normally set to 2048. And then the max walk speed is set to set to 600. So instead of that, what we're doing is we're just making the acceleration up to 10,000 and then the walk speed to 2,000. So if you just had this, what would happen is, let me just break this link for right now. Let me just keep that hidden. Oops. Let me click play. Let's go back to our map. So what would happen right now is if I press Q, like our character would go, it will do the dash, but it's not going to, no, first of all, it's not going to stop the dash animation, because what we need is part of the reverse part of the recovery, right? Okay, but it does increase your max acceleration and max walk speed, so it will instantaneously push you through X to Y based on whichever way your character is looking, which is why this capsule component exists. If you want to instead have it so that the character dashes in the direction of your controller, so wherever your mouse is looking, you can use something like get controller rotation, get the z-axis off it, and get the forward vector out of that part. And what that's going to do is, let me undock this blueprint. What that's going to do is, if I'm looking on that side, then our character starts dashing on the direction we're looking at instead of whichever way our character is facing, because it's trying to take the direction of the controller. But I'm just gonna leave it to capsule component for now because I want this dash to just go straight to whichever way the character is looking. Right. Another thing that needs to be done is the play animation. So we have these two animations here, which is the jump loop or the dash loop, right? And then we have the dash recovery. So the way we're doing this is that we are playing the animation on the skeletal mesh and making sure that this is looping. So in case our dash, for instance, if we go ahead and set this to, let's say, 2.5 seconds, right? Even though our animation is only 1 second long, we want it to constantly keep looping as long as the animation is going, right? As long as the animation keeps going, you can see the character is still playing that animation. If you didn't have the looping portion turned on here, then your character would just become in an idle pose. So like right there, you see the character basically becomes still. His legs don't move, he just becomes a stuck frame. That's why you want to have looping turned on, and based on however long your dash is, you can have that. I know there's a float curve added to it, but technically we're not using it, we're only using the length part. So even if you don't have anything in here at all, you can get away with it, because this time portion over here, this isn't really going into anything. That's what the float curve does inside the timeline anyway. Right. So once the update happens and then your character has finally finished it, so this timeline ends, that's when you want to play the looping the recovery animation. Make sure this is not looping, and then you set back the acceleration and the max walk speed back to normal, which is what we initially had it here, right, in the defaults. Max acceleration, max step height, etc., max walk speed. And then we have a little delay. This delay is the same as the entirety of the animation, which is 0.5 seconds. And then we set the animation mode. So what the animation mode does is it just basically puts this from animation asset, which was getting played, back to the animation blueprint. So it's going back to whatever animation blueprint it was using previously. Right, and so during the dash, you also don't want your character to be able to move in different directions. So for that, what we're using is a disable input. If you don't have this, then what's going to happen is while you're moving in the middle of your dash, like you'll be able to change direction, and you don't want to do that because your character shouldn't be able to change directions while he's dashing. So that's why we're going to be using a disable input. And if you're using a disable input here, then make sure after you have a finish node set up that you have an enable input also mentioned for it. And finally, what we have is particle effects. This time, instead of using something like auto activate, right, we're just going to use hidden in game. So if you have this toggled on, what this is going to do is as soon as the game starts, this particle is going to be hidden. And whenever you want to unhide it, you can just drag it onto your event graph and then search for a node called set hidden in game. If this is toggled off, that means the particle can be seen. If then it's toggled on, so basically once the dash finishes, it's gonna hide itself again. And yeah, that is basically a setup for dash. And now if you want to increase the speed or duration of it, then you can do that here. For instance, if I want to do a very quick dash, even though it's on a very short distance, I can set max walk speed to 5,000. So now if I dash, it'll go a lot further than before, even though, as you can see, like the dash is a lot further. But if I set it back to 2,000, the dash isn't going to be as fast. So like the distance obviously covered by it is less. Okay. And if you want the acceleration to be super high, well, 10,000 is basically going to make it instantaneous, but let's try 50,000 just for curiosity's sake. Yeah, it just gets it to the max walk speed basically as fast as it can. So yeah, you don't want the acceleration to be way too high. 10,000 is more than enough.